Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me as we talk a little bit about gender roles in classical literature. I apologize for the dramatic title, but the problem of masculinity has actually been something that I've been thinking about long before I took this class. I can rely on traditional definitions, which is sort of aligns with a lot of the epic poetry that we've been reading, or you can go by modern day definitions. Um, The problem is with the traditional definitions is twofold. Initially, uh, traditional definitions are very specific, and usually they describe a set of virtues that I do not see being unuseful for the opposite sex. As an example, it's traditional for men to be strong. Are women not to be strong? If I'm teaching my sons to grow up to be good men, what do I tell them? Be strong. You know, but am I not supposed to teach my daughters that? Um, I don't. I struggle to find any particular virtue of masculinity to be ideal and only for the one uh, sex. And then the second issue that I find with the um, traditional view of the masculine gender is that it can often be used for tyrannical purposes, which we see a lot of in Homer. We see a lot in Gilgamesh. We have Gilgamesh just runs around raping people, but it's okay because he's the perfect man. And this is sort of ideal. If he's the ideal male, then everything he does is good because he's just being the perfect thing that a male should be, right? Same with Achilles. Well, the problem is here, if that is what all men are supposed to be, what if everybody was an Achilles? It wouldn't work. Everybody would be just killing everybody all the time. And so that doesn't work either. Uh, it's, I feel, used more for tyrannical purposes than actual finding meaning and purpose behind things. And so what they did with classical literature is they've made a mythology that justifies bad behavior. So I struggle with following classical meaning behind the male gender. Um, and then I struggle with modern meaning behind gender because modern meaning would have you uh, have no definition. I'm going to use an article in this paper. It's actually a legal document explaining um, specifically for businesses and sexual harassment purposes, the definitions of what gender identity, and words like that, terms like that are. And I think I have not found one that didn't say um, that gender is completely based on an internal understanding of what it is for that individual. So that means there is no meaning. There's no objective meaning. Everything's subjective. Everything just depends on the person. Well, so if you're looking for purpose, that means you have to make it up. So how do you make up purpose? Well, you look someplace else for it. You can't really make something up on your own, so you try to look for things, and so you end up either looking back at the classical or trying to invent something new, which is nearly impossible. So there's my problem. The problem gets worse because as a person of faith, I believe that we're created and endowed with purpose. And so I believe that everything happens for a reason. And so I feel that my creator has instilled in me a purpose for being who I am. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to take a snapshot of the traditional definition of the male gender. The reason why I go with male gender is because all of our classical literature is written by men. So I think it's a more idealized picture uh, um, of what a man should be. If it's written by men, it's going to be idealized. So that's why I'll say, okay, well, according to men, this is what the ideal is. in classic literature. And then I'm going to compare that with the modern definitions, legal definitions per the state. And I'm going to sort of try to come up with something that satisfies or at least answers both sides of the argument. And the thing is, they're not actually polar, these two views on gender. At first, I thought it was, but it really isn't. And so, what I hope to get out of this research, I have another article written by C.S. Lewis called The Necessity of Chivalry. And what that does is it talks about the necessity of having a balance for the knights who would, on the field, be all blood and iron, but in court, be meek and humble and gentle. And so this is the first time that gender is approached with, hit the brakes. You're not supposed to be all blood and guts and gore. You're supposed to know when to give into that nature and when to maximize it on the battlefield and when to stifle it in court. This example is shown in that article through Lancelot, but it can definitely be applied to Song of Roland, and so that's where I'm going to make that comparison. And so, in between the ancient literature that we have and the modern literature, we have this place where we arrived at in medieval literature that talked about an approach to one's nature that was not internal. And that's what I meant before when I said that the classical literature and the modern definitions of gender are not polar. They're actually quite similar. They're both based on internal definitions. Chivalry is the only time where the idea is to take an ideal that is external and change me based on that, rather than making the ideal something that has to come from within. And this works for a number of reasons, especially for the person of Christian faith. Number one, it takes into account that we are all part of a fallen creation. So the problem with the traditional literature and the classical literature is that it idealizes us as the creation to be the ideal male or ideal female, but we're fallen. And so it doesn't take into account the problems with masculine nature or female nature. And then the other problem of trying to remove all definition from gender is, well, now you're ignoring the creator. And so this idea of chivalry, I feel like that approach will solve a lot of the questions I have about the meaning of being a man. And so, sort of the conclusion that I came to was that the definition of being a man is mastering one's masculinity, and the definition of being a woman is mastering one's femininity. And it's interesting that the more the man masters his masculinity and the woman masters her femininity, the more they become like each other. And that's kind of a cool thing, that they kind of become one together. The more mature they get, it's not that the more mature he gets, the more masculine he gets. Actually, maturity is adopting some of the feminine traits, and maturity for a woman is adopting some of the masculine traits. And so the two become one. And I'm not sure if I'm going to pursue that in my paper or not. I think that it's already long enough. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys listening to my arguments. I hope this comes out all right. Thank you so much.